My topic today is the best Bible story you don't know, or rather, the best Bible story you may not know. I'm sure some of you know it, but it's not one of the most familiar stories. This is an Old Testament story. It's told in two places, in 2 Kings 18 and 19 and in 2 Chronicles 32. It describes an event that happened in 701 BC. It was an event in which all of history was balanced on a knife edge. If it had come about slightly differently, everything we know would be entirely different. This was a turning point. But for some background, you all know most likely the story of the first three kings of Israel. King Saul, who lost favor with God and who was replaced by King David, and then David's son, the wise King Solomon. The kingdom of Israel prospered and expanded under David and especially under Solomon. But after Solomon's death, the story gets complicated and messy. In 922 BC, the kingdom of Israel was split into two parts: a northern kingdom, confusingly called Israel, and a southern kingdom called Judah. Here's a map showing the two kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. God sent prophets to both of these kingdoms, and both had good kings and bad kings. But I think it's fair to say that the northern kingdom was worse. What's more, the southern kingdom of Judah had two big advantages going for it. Jerusalem was there, along with the temple built by Solomon, and Judah was ruled continuously by descendants of King David. The northern kingdom was ruled by a series of usurpers and founders of brief dynasties. After 200 years of this situation, disaster struck the northern kingdom in the form of the Assyrian Empire. This was a powerful empire located in northern Mesopotamia, and it swept across much of the ancient world. It essentially conquered the northern kingdom of Israel well before 722 BC and ruled it as a subject state. But in 722, under its new king Sargon II, there's Sargon II, the Assyrians fully occupied Israel and imposed their resettlement program. The Assyrians found that a good way to pacify vanquished peoples was to remove them from their home countries and settle them elsewhere in the empire. This destroyed their connection to their homeland, their home culture, and usually their religion as well. So beginning in 722 BC, the Assyrians began to deport most of the Jews living in the northern kingdom of Israel. They were resettled all over the Assyrian Empire, and people from elsewhere were settled in Israel in their place. The Jews who were deported at this time never returned. They were fully absorbed among other peoples. You've heard of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. This is what happened to them. They disappeared without a trace. So at this point, all that's left of God's chosen people is the southern kingdom of Judah. When this happens, Judah is ruled by a king called Hezekiah, who was one of the good kings. We're told that he trusted in the Lord and that there was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. He held fast to the Lord and did not stop following him. He kept the commandments the Lord had given Moses. And the Lord was with him. He was successful in everything he undertook. But Hezekiah had some big problems. The Assyrians wanted his kingdom too. For years, Hezekiah was able to resist the pressure brought against his kingdom by the Assyrians. At some point, he had to pay tribute to keep the Assyrians at bay, but he was able to maintain Judah's independence more or less. Among other things, it appears that he used an alliance with Egypt to hold back the Assyrians. In 701 BC, however, the Assyrians, under their king Sennacherib, there's Sennacherib, he looks a lot like Sargon. Under Sennacherib, the Assyrians got more serious about conquering Judah. Sennacherib sent a large army into the area, and it captured all of the fortified cities in the land. And finally, the army besieged Jerusalem, the last stronghold of the Israelites. The field commander of the Assyrians called out to the leaders of the Israelites, urging them to surrender. He told them it was useless to depend on their former ally Egypt, and that God wouldn't protect them either. He claimed that God himself had told Sennacherib to destroy Judah. The leaders of Judah responded to this speech as follows: "Please speak to your servants in Aramaic, since we understand it. Don't speak to us in Hebrew, in the hearing of the people on the wall. You can see they were concerned about morale, and rightly so. But the field commander continued in Hebrew, so everyone could understand him, and he said, "Was it only to your master and you that my master sent me to say these things, and not to the people sitting on the wall, who, like you, will have to eat their own excrement and drink their own urine? Hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. This is what the king says. Do not let Hezekiah deceive you. He cannot deliver you from my hand. Do not let Hezekiah persuade you to trust in the Lord when he says, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hands of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah. This is what the king of Assyria says. Make peace with me and come out to me. Then each of you will eat fruit from your own vine and fig tree and drink water from your own cistern until I come and take you to a land like your own, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and honey. Choose life and not death. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for he is misleading you when he says, the Lord will deliver us. Has the God of any nation ever delivered his hand from the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim, Hena, and Eva? Have they rescued Samaria from my hand? Who of all the gods of these countries has been able to save his land from me? How then can the Lord deliver Jerusalem from my hand? It seems to me that he makes some very good points. When King Hezekiah heard this, he was distressed and tore his clothes. He sent messengers to the prophet Isaiah for advice. Isaiah told the king not to be afraid and that the Lord was going to deliver Jerusalem. Still, the field commander sent further threats, identifying a lot of additional countries that had been destroyed without being delivered by their gods. Hezekiah went up to the temple and prayed for deliverance. He said, "It is true, Lord, that the Assyrian kings have laid waste to these nations and their lands. They have thrown their gods into the fire and destroyed them, for they were not gods, but only wood and stone, fashioned by human hands. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God." And once again, Isaiah prophesied, declaring that the Lord said that the Assyrians would not enter Jerusalem or even shoot an arrow there. So what happened next? The story in 2 Kings states it succinctly. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, broke camp and withdrew. He returned to Nineveh and stayed there. And that's the end of the story. So did this really happen? Was there a plague in the camp? Was there a mass poisoning? A supernatural massacre by a sword-wielding angel? We can't glean any more details from the Bible story. But in Sennacherib's annals, sources not in the Bible, Sennacherib claims to have conquered 46 of Hezekiah's fortified cities and to have made Hezekiah captive in his royal residence. But he doesn't claim to have taken Jerusalem. And there's no doubt that Hezekiah kept his throne and that the heirs of David continued to rule in Jerusalem for another 136 years. So yes, this happened. How exactly isn't clear in the historical record, but something stopped the Assyrians before they could capture Jerusalem. During the next 136 years, Judah had good and bad kings, but mostly bad ones. And finally, in 586 BC, the Lord got fed up with Judah and its kings and its sins, and Judah too was conquered, and its people were carried off into captivity. Jerusalem and the temple were destroyed. But there was a critical difference from what happened in the northern kingdom of Israel. By this time, the Assyrian Empire had been eclipsed by the Babylonian Empire, and it is the Babylonians who carried Judah into exile. But the Babylonians don't have the same kind of resettlement policy as the Assyrians. They don't destroy Jewish culture or religion. In fact, in some ways, it flourishes in Babylon, and it doesn't completely die out in Judah either. And then, about 50 years later, the wheel turns again, the Babylonians are out, and the Persians are in. King Cyrus of the Persians has a tolerant view of religions, and he allows the Israelites to begin to return to Judah. There's an object called the Cyrus cylinder that states this policy of Cyrus in Akkadian cuneiform. It It's on display at the British Museum in London. If you'd like to see it someday, here's a picture of this Cyrus cylinder. After the Jews were allowed to return to Judah, they rebuild the temple and the walls of Jerusalem, and there they stay until Roman times. What's the point of telling you this long story? And why do I think it's such a great story? Well, think about it. On that night in 701 BC, all of religion, history, and culture as we know it was on the brink of total destruction. All of Judah had fallen except for its capital city, and it was surrounded with no real defense. The Assyrians had already captured 46 fortified cities, and Jerusalem was next. And if they had succeeded, the people of Judah would have been exiled, never to return, just like the people of the northern kingdom. They would have disappeared from history forever. Think about that. No Judaism. As a result, no Christianity and no Islam. The history of the world would have been radically different. Art, literature, music, even language, all totally changed. If the Roman Empire ever arose, it wouldn't have become Christian. So no Catholic Church, no Renaissance, no Reformation. You can't even imagine what the world would be like today if this had happened. But it didn't happen. The Assyrians just went away. Outside of the Bible, history doesn't tell us why. The Bible tells us that it was God's plan to preserve the people of Israel. And they have been preserved. What a turning point this was. I've been thinking about this story lately as I observe what's going on in our world. We can see turning points all around us. A virus begins by taking hold in a single unknown person, and the entire world is upended. The death of a single person in Minneapolis sparks a nationwide, really worldwide wave of grief, anger, and self-examination. And we remember that as Christians, we believe that the sacrifice of a single man changed and continues to change everything. What can we do with a story like this? It seems to me that each of us may be the key person in another turning point, large or small, whether we know it or not. In the story of Judah and the Assyrians, it is the faith of a single person, King Hezekiah, that prevents the surrender and destruction of the entire nation and the changing of the whole world. What is my role? What is your role in the next turning point? We don't know. But we do know that the way to be ready for it is to do as Hezekiah did, to walk with God in faith. Amen.